Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest Nicole Cadman, who's a partner at Freshfields. Nicole, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me here.
So, Nicole, you have this very interesting background where you became the general counsel and spent quite a number of years at the very, very well-known and famous Y Combinator. Tell me a little bit about how that opportunity even, presented itself to you I guess you were an associate before that.
Yeah, I was an associate at Oric at the time. I had been practicing for a number of years, and it's just so happened that as a lot of opportunities in the startup world are, a friend of mine was at Y Combinator, and he mentioned to me that they were looking to hire somebody on the legal team. And so I obviously went, I was excited by the opportunity. It sounded interesting. I think because in particular, it's kind of, YC is an interesting mix of like you're working with founders, but it's also a VC.
Mm.
So it has a really interesting mix of work for people with my kind of background.
Hmm.
And so I went and chatted with them and it ended up being a good fit. And I joined in October 2016. So a
Wow.
while ago now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, was your practice before then? Were you working with startups or what was your practice
Yeah.
before then?
Yeah, I was in what was at the time called the Emerging Companies Group at Oric, and then I think they've later rebranded to the Technology Companies Group.
Hmm.
And so I primarily did company side representation from formation up through like M&A exits, and then did some investor side work as
Right.
well.
Now, were a lot of your companies or clients members of Y Combinator? Was that a coincidence or?
That, so I had a couple, but I actually didn't have a ton
Mm,
of YC companies as
mm,
my clients. I had definitely three or four, but in a emerging companies practice at that time, the numbers have probably shifted. But I had probably like 30 or 40 companies I was working with, so it wasn't the great majority. And at that time, YC was beginning to establish its reputation as one of the top accelerators, but it definitely
right.
wasn't the only one because there was also Techstars, there was 500 startups. I mean, and there still is. But I think that YC's reputation has grown a lot since then. And so I think it was more of a leap, I think, at that time
Mm.
than you would consider that kind of move
I
today.
see. I see. Because it was a lot smaller back then and
Yeah, yeah, it was smaller. It had been around for a good 10 years.
okay.
But I think maybe 1,000 companies had gone through in the first 10 years. And then since then, another 4,000 companies have gone through
Wow. Wow.
the program. And so and then at that time, Airbnb was just starting to be known.
Mm.
Like I remember taking my first Airbnb trip about in 2016 or 2017. And it was like it was a new, novel experience at the time. It's definitely,
Yeah.
so some of the logos that you see and are associated with YC today didn't have quite the same cachet back then.
Yeah, totally. Well, what attracted you about the opportunity? I mean, why, it sounds like you were doing well at Oric. You enjoyed working with startup companies. What made you decide to join this thing? And maybe it wasn't even that famous at that time.
Yeah, I mean, so it was kind of a hard decision for me, really. I really love the people I worked with at Oric.
Hmm.
And the people that I work with is really important to me in general for my career. And like I said, it was taking a little bit of a leap off of the, very expected path of like knowing what would come next.
Hmm.
But my friend Michael Seibel, who was at YC, um, he just had a great energy and he optimism and enthusiasm
Mm.
about Y Combinator and everything it was doing. And we had a couple of other friends that were going through the program or had gone through the program, and everybody was just so enamored with the experience that it felt like it felt like a risk that I wanted to take
Mm.
and explore something
Hmm.
new.
Hmm. Well, when you were there, what did you do? Did you actually advise the portfolio companies that are at Y Combinator, or how does it work? Like, what do you do as general counsel? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of everything, I think, and that was one of the things that attracted me to the opportunity.
mm,
So, you know, it is a fund, so it does have aspects of like a traditional VC, GC.
mm,
Um, in that like you're advising the fund on its investments, on risks, on board seats later on when we did have a continuity fund and we took some board seats and led some later investment rounds. But then you're also working with the batch and the founders. And obviously, when you're in-house at an accelerator, those companies are not your client. So it's
Right.
not legal advice, but there's a lot of things that are not legal advice that help founders. And it's just
Mhm.
like, this is how basically educating founders about how the startup world works from a legal perspective, how
Mm,
fundraising works,
mm.
how formation work, how corporate governance works, because a lot of that for first time founders is really hard to parse.
Mm.
And especially back then, now there's more online resources, but back then there
Right.
wasn't a lot about that.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of an interesting, we would sometimes say that it was kind of like being a professor at a
Hmm.
university, sort of
Mm.
educating people about how this whole ecosystem works. And I
Yeah.
think that, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed was being able to make founders understand how the world worked and sort of leveling the playing field for them to a certain extent when they're negotiating with
Hmm.
investors.
Yeah. Was it more challenging than being a law firm or more chaotic or more hectic? I mean, how would you describe the overall experience?
Um, so I think uh, for those of you in the audience that have worked with founders and worked with startup companies, I think there's inevitably an element of good chaos
Hmm.
that happens. And I think that's partly intentional. Like if things get too stagnant, like that means that you're not growing as an organization. So things would be shaken up regularly. But you get used to it, and I think you start to adapt and build a muscle for dealing with change that I think I didn't have before. And I
Hmm.
think it's made me a lot more comfortable with uncertainty and change. And ultimately, that served me
Yeah,
well
yeah, yeah.
in
Well,
my
you were there
career.
for quite a while, so I assume you enjoyed it and had a lot of fun. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fun place. I mean, I have a lot of memories about, especially when, like, in 2016, 2017, up until the pandemic, we had interviews for the program in person down in
Hmm.
our big office in Mountain View. And, you'd see all of these founders come in. They were nervous, they were excited. And you'd see like just the craziest demos of, I mean, there was like little robots rolling around. I remember at one point when was when the Silicon Valley show had come out, one of the actors from Silicon Valley had actually participated as a founder in a
Oh,
company that
funny.
was interviewing. And I remember he was sitting at a table and there's a robot rolling around and you're just like, what is this? Where am I? How did I get here? But it was really fun.
Interesting. Well, you're certainly, I mean, there's no place that could be more the center of Silicon Valley than being a place like Y Combinator. What made you decide to return to private practice? How did that present itself to you?
One of the things that I really enjoyed at YC was helping to build out the infrastructure and the team to support all of the companies
Hmm.
that YC works with.
Hmm.
And, I do not have all of the risk appetite of a founder, but I enjoy
Hmm.
helping founders. And I
Hmm.
actually found out through YC that I enjoy building. And so I, was talking to Freshfields, and they were looking to build out even further their emerging companies practice in Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
And that seemed like a unique opportunity
Hmm.
to be able to help build out the infrastructure and the team to support an emerging companies practice with all of the things I had learned from founders about what they liked and what they didn't like with their existing legal services.
Hmm.
And I mean, talking to hundreds of thousands of founders over the years, I
Yeah,
have
for
a lot
sure.
of learning on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, that knowledge and that experience, I assume, has been really helpful in your return.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think it gives you, you know, I think there's disadvantages and advantages to just spending a little time outside a law firm. But I think for me, having spent the time so closely working with so many founders has given me some good insights.
Yeah. Do you think your clients can kind of tell that you had like a deeper experience so you understand maybe more nuanced things that, lawyers at an outside firm might not necessarily know or have access to?
I think, you know, I think what they may notice is that I have spent a lot of time with founders, and I think my husband's also a founder. I think
Mm.
I can put myself in that mindset fairly well. And I think one of the things that I noticed when I was at YC is that, especially for first-time founders, it's not always obvious, like the line between, what your lawyer is going to answer, what your accountant's going to answer, what, um, some other aspect, like your immigration lawyer. Like people don't understand that even immigration lawyers aren't usually within big firms.
Yeah,
And so I've gotten a very uh, good understanding of all of the kinds of questions and how they all fit together,
yeah,
that I don't think I had when I was just at a firm, because you're seeing like the startup grow and like how these things come up. Like issues don't come up just as like a legal issue. It's usually like there's a legal issue and there's something else. And
yeah,
you see how they fit together. And I think that gives you a good understanding of like what actually the founder's thinking about at the moment.
yeah. And how's it going so far? Are you enjoying being back in private practice?
Really am. I really am. One of the things that I also was looking forward to going back to private practice was working really closely with individual founders, because
Uh-huh.
when you have such a broad portfolio, it starts to get hard to have those really deep relationships one-on-one.
Yeah.
And so, getting to, work hand in hand with people very closely, I've really enjoyed again.
Uh-huh. Are you hoping to really have a more of a startup kind of focused practice, or are you hoping to have more of a broad-based, practice where you're going to work with larger companies as well?
I think, my focus right now, especially given my background, is working with startups, but we have the capabilities here to work with companies throughout their life cycle, which was another thing that brought me here. And so I think, being able to help companies grow through all of the life stages is really appealing to me, and I'm excited to do that. And I think we have the capabilities to do that here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Nicole, it's been a fascinating conversation. Congratulations on your success in your new position, and thanks for taking the time to share your story with me.
Of course, it's great to be here.
This is Richard Hsu and Nicole Cadman. Thanks.